Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on changing leadership expectations in a post-COVID world. Now, what we'll do is that before we get into the webinar, I'll just take a quick minute and I'll explain the agenda why we felt the need to have this webinar, and I'll quickly introduce the panelists to you before we go ahead. So the reason why we thought for this webinar is, pretty well known at the moment, since these COVID times that we have are changing the socio-economic fiber on which the way that we live, go about our lives, and how business is being conducted these days. So one of the clear imperatives that emerge is that because of these times, we require very strong leaders to be able to navigate our organization through this. And so we will talk about what kind of leadership we require, how we should go about measuring attributes of these leaders, and how these can then be taken care of at the ground level through the panelists that we have today. So the 3-point agenda here is the challenges faced by HR today and the attributes required in future leaders, the research on leadership and how to qualify and measure the above attributes, and deployment of best practices to identify and develop. A couple of quick ground rules here is that we'll request everybody to keep themselves on mute and avoid any background noise. You can ask us questions while the panelists are speaking through the Q&A button, which is there at the bottom of your screen. And you can please write the name of the person to whom the question is directed. And we will take these questions towards the end of the webinar when all 3 panelists have spoken. A recording of this webinar will be made available afterwards. And we'll also require your feedback on this webinar. So you'll get a mail after the webinar is done with the feedback link. And also we'll provide you a link later for the webinar. So with that, let me introduce you to our panelists. Our first panelist is Mr. Gurkiran Deep Singh. He's the head of talent management, learning and organizational development at Titan Company Limited. So he'll be giving us HR practitioner's view of this topic that we spoke about, that what are the kind of things which we require in the leaders in these prime times. The second panelist is Mr. Sean Farrell. He's the managing director of Caliper Australia and India. Caliper, as you know, is a psychometric assessment tool. And from here, we'll get into the perspective of what kind of attributes are required in leaders and how to go about measuring those. And a third panelist is Mr. Srinivasan KJ, who's a principal consultant at Kognoz Research and Consulting. Kognoz is another consulting company which is into the leadership space. So with that, I think we can start off, and I'd like to invite our first panelist, Mr. Gurkiran Deep Singh, to take the mic, and I'll be presenting his slides, and he can take it from here. Stage is yours, Gurkiran.
Thanks, Rahul. And let me begin by saying that it's not often that leaders get tested collectively in the way they are being tested today. And if we reflect on it, our current generation of leaders hasn't seen a collective crisis of this nature in their entire career. So I think this topic becomes even more relevant. And my role has given me the opportunity to speak with employees, with leaders, on their personal journeys, what expectations do we have from leaders, their challenges, and how they are navigating the current situation. I've also been in conversation with colleagues across industries, and what I'm about to share is really an opinion based on these conversations and observations that I have. So I've kind of structured what I'm sharing in 3 parts. The first one is about articulating some of the expectations that different stakeholder segments have from leaders. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is the need to survive, or the expectations that leaders will help their organization survive with as little damage as possible, and that requires them to make sense of and navigate through waters that are uncharted and they've never been through them. Decisions to make around optimizing costs, managing cash flows, and several other decisions, difficult decisions that they are expected to make in order to survive. The second expectation that organizations and stakeholders have from leaders is get ready to bounce back, get future ready, think about the future, try to anticipate and plan for what might be coming their way, even though all the rules of the past are being overwritten and those rules don't apply anymore. And that leads to the third expectation, which is reimagine how you're running your business. There is no consistency today in how each segment or market is behaving, and the need from a leader to reimagine markets, reimagine consumers, products, services, processes, and almost every aspect of their business. There is a significant shift we are expecting in consumer behavior and spending patterns. And there is a high need to be creative, to innovate, and to digitalize. The fourth expectation is really, and a very heightened one, on how leaders are connecting with different stakeholder groups. Employees at different levels want to listen to their leaders and want to listen and connect with messages of hope and want to know what the future holds for them. Business partners, associates, vendors, suppliers are also wanting to connect with the leader and listen to what the organization and the leader has to say to them about the future. Stakeholders, including boards and shareholders, want more time and attention from leaders, and so do customers. And hence, the need for the leader to significantly improve the connect, because each stakeholder group is looking up to the leader and requiring the leader to listen with empathy and to understand and to provide answers. The fifth expectation that leaders are articulating is that they are being expected to create hope. There is a lot of anxiety at a personal and a systemic level, and leaders are being expected to lead with trust and compassion and to build hope of a positive future, and not just for employees, but also building that capability in leaders below them and building resilience in their teams. And finally, the sixth expectation, and while this was already evident, many organizations were already charting their digital journeys, the need for this is accelerated, and it's now combined with the need to lead virtually. And while several organizations were comfortable with that, there were many more which have not started to work virtually in the past, and that need has significantly accelerated. I now want to shift to the second perspective, which is from a leader's perspective, what challenges they are facing. And essentially what one hears from them is that they're currently operating in three worlds: the world of self, the world of others, and the world of business. And the challenges that they're facing are in two domains. One is around leadership capacity, and the other is around personal capacity. So beginning with leadership capacity, essentially they're having to manage many paradoxes at work. One example being you need to survive, which means making difficult decisions, and yet you need to create hope and show a positive future. So they are grappling, at a leadership capacity level with challenges of personal vulnerability while they're required to project confidence. To manage uncertainty in business operations and make decisions in the dark where the old rules don't exist or work anymore. They also are deeply concerned about the safety of their teams, the morale of their teams, and yet need to balance that with ensuring that the teams are productive. And they're challenged at making many difficult and unpopular decisions, which could be in terms of layoffs, closures, costs, deferred payments, and so on. While that's on the leadership front, they also face several challenges on the personal front on personal capacity. And I think personally, of course, like all of us, they are also challenged at being responsible at home, not just responsible in the organization. On the personal front, they're also, you know, worried about the well-being of themselves. They are under a lot of stress personally, and they have to manage that stress while projecting open confidence for the organization and teams that they work with. They need to manage their own energy, physical, mental, emotional energies, not having all the answers and the fear of failure with high levels of stress. And in some cases, if they hadn't already adopted technology, discomfort with technology. So that's some of the challenges that they're facing on the personal front. So the question that begs is, so how do leaders navigate this and help their teams and organizations bounce back? And the first capability that I think, I want to talk about, which will really help them navigate the current situation, is mindfulness. And it's all about their own level of self-awareness, being in touch with yourself and managing your own energies, being able to switch off and recharge when needed, because their time is being demanded by so many stakeholders. There is this pressure to be always on, and hence the need to be able to switch off, recharge yourself, and come back is something which is extremely crucial. And staying in touch with your own feelings and emotions and what you are going through as a leader is crucial. The next capability I want to talk about is empathy. I don't think people at this stage want to listen about how much the current situation is costing the company. People really want to feel that they are in the same boat as their boss. They want to know that even though the leader is employed to manage and run a business, he or she is also a human being, someone who cares for them and understands what they are going through. And people want their leaders to be transparent and want to hear the truth from leaders. While at the same time, and I've put three capabilities together in the next point that I'm trying to make is, leaders are required to think in an agile manner, be decisive and yet be flexible. And this is one of the paradoxes that leaders need to manage. And maintain flexibility as new information emerges, simply because the change out there is just so dynamic. Next, I want to talk about resilience and optimism. We earlier spoke about the need to create hope, and leaders can do that only if at a personal level they are resilient and hold optimism close to them. And in these times, the prolonged negative outlook can get to the best of us. And hence the need to stay resilient and build that in your teams is another capability which is heightened. And many of these capabilities that I'm speaking of may not necessarily be new. Some of them we've spoken of in the past, but many get significantly heightened in a situation that we are encountering today. I also want to talk about the need for leaders to stay curious, which links to them being learning agile. Their ability to dig deep into past learnings that they have had, to delve into learnings of others, to draw connection and meaning from them, to be able to learn on the fly and learn from others and apply that to as the situation unfolds, so that they're able to make sense of the situation, apply new learning, test that out, experiment, learn from that, and move on and constantly evolve along with the situation. And finally, I want to talk about a leader's need and ability to be able to think without boundaries, simply because the boundaries have shifted, boundaries have changed, and hence, remove any shackles that one may have, remove frames of reference that one may have from the past, and break those boundaries and do fresh thinking in order to be able to create and be innovative. I want to close with just saying that while, in the past we've always heard the leader's position is lonely, we want our leader to be decisive and agile and tough. The reality is that it need not be lonely at the top. It's unlikely that any single leader will have all the answers today. And it's important that leaders make themselves vulnerable also. So while they're expected to provide answers, if they make themselves vulnerable, organizations and teams will see them as being transparent and honest. And in that vulnerability, if they're able to seek opinion, if they're able to collaborate, listen actively, partner both within and outside the organization and leverage their networks, they need not be lonely at the top, and they can be energized by holding together many minds and the wisdom of those minds to form a collective opinion and find direction. And with that, they are likely to be able to manage the many paradoxes that they're facing probably much better than if they were to try to do that all by themselves. So Rahul, I'll close there and transition back to you with these thoughts.
Thank you, GD. I think that was really insightful indeed, and it's great to hear an HR practitioner point of view that what exactly is it that the organizations are facing. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Sean Farrell, who is the Managing Director of Caliber Australia and India, and he'll present his perspective of how these things can be addressed. Sean, it's
Thanks, Rahul. And can you just confirm you've got my slideshow there on screen, please?
Yes.
Sorry. Yep, got that. Thank you. Always trying to avoid the technology problems. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for coming along this afternoon and this evening from me. Greetings from Melbourne. Really interesting listening to what GD was saying there, and I'm going to approach this topic, and you will notice a common thread through the three of us. I'm going to approach this topic from a scientific research standpoint. A lot of the things that GD has just mentioned are backed up by some research that our organization is doing around the competencies required for leadership through uncertain times such as these, but not just now, but as we move into the future of work. So we are doing a lot of mapping of our psychometric assessment along what does the future of work look like as we move forward in technology, and this becomes a more common thread. Not necessarily a pandemic happening more commonly, but major disruption in business. So over the next 11 minutes, my focus with you will be, what are some of the lessons that we've received from COVID? I think one thing that a lot of organizations have realized is they are very ill-equipped from a leadership team perspective, a business strategy perspective, to handle a situation such as this. And I think some of your questions already link to, are the leaders equipped at the moment with a strategy to handle a scenario such as this? Very difficult to prepare for, but this is a good insight into what we need to do as HR leaders to prepare our organizations. I'm going to talk to you about the results of the research we've done on this topic, on updating a leadership model, and most of you would have a leadership competency framework. But what are some of the competencies that really speak to handling crisis management, in self-management, managing others, managing business decisions, and so on? And there's some new information coming out there, and I'll share that with you. And then finally, how do we as HR leaders look to the future? How do we start taking action now to say, okay, once we're through this, what are the actions that we take tomorrow, by the end of this year, and then moving forward? How do we future-proof and create an action plan? So that's what we'll cover. If you haven't heard of Caliper before, we are a global psychometric assessment company. We've been around a long time, but we're relatively new to India. We've been there for a long time as well, but through partners previously, but direct to market now. The Caliper profile is the foundation of all of our work. So this is a very in-depth, very accurate psychometric assessment. And the reason we have such an interest in this is that our assessment really works around being customized to company competency frameworks and new research. It has a lot of power to do that. It's been used quite a lot, 6 million times around the globe. I'm going to link back to this in a way that may be of interest to you as HR leaders in approaching your own providers, or perhaps looking at tools like this and how they can help you in terms of knowing where do we need to focus our development initiatives for our leadership teams and our high potential identification moving forward. So what are some of the lessons that we've received? I think, as GD was just saying, there is a significant lack of certainty in the market at the moment. And this is not just the economy, this is in individuals. And not just employees, this is in your leaders too. You know, we have an environment of significant reduced job security, where people aren't sure if tomorrow is the day when they'll be let go because revenues are dropping so significantly. And what that creates is what we call a threat state. And this is a term used by the Neuro Leadership Institute of when there is a lack of certainty, there is this reduction of security, we enter a threat state. And 4/5 of our brain are focused on dealing with that threat. And this is what can lead to a real reduction in positivity, a lack of engagement. Only 1/5 of your brain in a threat state is focused on moving onwards, moving forward, on optimistic thoughts. And so we as HR leaders, as business leaders, have a significant challenge in turning that around and creating a positive environment where people are looking forward to the future and focused on that optimism. So the end result of what you are likely to be continuing to experience is reduced engagement. And that just highlights how critical leadership is at this time and how critical it's going to continue to be as the work environment changes. Some of the research that I work on significantly is looking at what places like, and organizations such as PwC, a lot of universities here in Australia are talking about the future of work. What does 2030 look like for leadership? And it ties in quite nicely with some of the things that we're looking at for COVID and how to deal with this. But the main themes behind that are disruption is going to become more and more regular. So it may not be a pandemic, but it might be significant changes such as restructures. It might be economic downturns. It is these difficult situations where we have to lead ourselves, others, and the organization through those times. And rapid change is a surety as automation increases in our manufacturing industries and so on. So to respond to that, we need to have agile business strategy, and we need to have agile workforces. We're likely to have less people required to do more varied and agile things. And of course, we need leadership agility, as GD was just talking about. We need to have agile leaders who can pivot as the environment changes. So when we look at what does a leader look like who can handle all of that, they need to be capable of instilling confidence and engagement in others. They also need to be capable of providing a sense of purpose in the midst of uncertainty and struggle. And these are not always those big events. They might be local restructures and so on. But the whole premise is to project a steadiness and confidence that maintains a positive culture in your organizations, even through difficult times. This is not the magic solution for you. It's going to be challenging through times like this regardless, but that's what we need our leaders to be doing. They need to be able to lead a team through crisis. So the model that our research and development department came up with looks like this. If we start at the top here, really when we look at these three factors, we're looking at managing oneself, and that's at the top, managing others on the right, and then managing business on the left. And that ties in very closely with what GD was saying around the critical competencies of leaders. So when we look at managing self, it's a comfort with ambiguity in a changing situation. This needs to be innate to us. We need to learn this competency. It's bouncing back from difficult situations, that resilience, and that learning agility as well, the capacity to take on new challenges. When we go about managing others at the connecting phase, we're looking at communicating, delegating, leading change in others. That's guiding you through this rather than guiding me through this. And then finally, managing the business through is around making decisions and sticking behind those decisions, closing information gaps, and planning and priority seeking. So when we look at how do we construct a psychometric assessment around this, what you're seeing on screen here is the entire Caliper competency library. So when someone completes the Caliper profile assessment, they get a score in terms of their potential on all of these areas. And what you'll see, sorry, the red shouldn't be there right now, but what you'll see here in yellow are the competencies that our research has said are critical for handling crises. And so we look at things such as leading change, team building, delegating, communicating, decisiveness, information seeking, and so on, but composure and resiliency. The ones there in red are your future of work competencies. And this ties into things such as managing innovation, global mindset as our businesses globalize, creativity and innovation, and comfort with ambiguity. So our most sophisticated clients are looking, putting their leaders or their high potentials through the caliper profile and saying, do we have the potential on our team to take us 10 years down the track based on this research? And the tool allows them to do that. Now, your providers may have a model for this already, so I encourage you to go and talk to them and say, what do you have that predicts future capability in terms of these kinds of areas? But this links together with a lot of leading research around what you need for crisis and future of work. So we take that model, what does it look like in a caliper report? That if some of you are caliper clients or have interacted with us in the past, this is what an individual's competency overview would look like. It's about a 15-page report that explores all of those areas. Where it gets really interesting for professionals such as yourselves is when we can look at a leadership team and we can assess the bench strength of our team to lead through these kinds of scenarios and take us forward. And what you'll notice is that the 10 competencies are up the top there. And if we single out these 3 areas, delegating, leading change, and team building, we see that this team is quite strong in this area. Now, this is a natural strength and innate strength. And these are the managing others competencies we spoke about a bit earlier. Interestingly, when we look at these 3, comfort with ambiguity, composure and resiliency, and learning agility, these are real people, we see that the managing self competencies are quite low. So we here have a leadership team that shows strong communication potential, but they may be internally struggling themselves. So what I'm telling you here is, don't forget about your leaders. They are also going through a difficult time. They're struggling to manage people through. We also need to offer them a significant level of support to get through this time as well. But a tool like this allows us to go, where do we target our development based on the innate strengths and the innate challenges of our leadership teams? And we can pass this information on to an organization like Kognoz and Srini, who you're going to hear from next, who can say, this is what we're going to do about it. This is the training and the development we're going to action. So what can you do now? What can we actually do? I encourage you to evaluate your psychometrics or your existing leaders to look at how do we develop them in light of this new research? Do we have that strength, or do we need to bring leaders in who can bring that strength to the table? Reevaluate how you identify future talent and your future high potentials. Keep in mind, do they have that adaptability, that learning agility, that strategic thinking, and so on? And external leadership candidates, make sure you're running them through that significant assessment process. If you would like access to this research, I'm more than happy to share it, even if you're not a caliper client. We just want to say, what should we be considering? Please let us know. We're happy to send you sample reports based on this. My lights have just gone out in my building, so that's unusual. Apologies for that. And as an attendee of our networks, we encourage you, please try the assessment. You can reach out to Rahul or on the feedback form. We're more than open for you to pilot this assessment on some of your leaders if you'd like to see how this research works. But I'll wrap up there. Hopefully I've given you some food for thought there. I'll hand over to Rahul.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for showing us how caliper and the assessment work. Next, we will be going over to KJ Srinivasan from Kognoz Consulting. Srini, whenever I can also see that there are a couple of questions which have gotten populated, and we'll tackle those right after Srinivasan's. Srini, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope that I am loud and clear and audible and not having any technology problems.
It's fine, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'll quickly share my screen and I'll wrap up things in say about 10 minutes time. Couple of things I want to put in as a perspective and as a food for thought is for people who don't know about Kognoz, we are an emerging advisory firm with a very simple vision: transforming people, transforming businesses. Our values are very relatable and very human in nature, which is humility, being reflective, We are collaborative, honest, and we work in an empowered manner. We have following 4 business verticals: business transformation, where we partner with organizations on the areas of sustainable business improvement, and we leverage our understanding of lean principles over there. Organization, people, and change, where we again partner with organizations in developing the people capabilities, and we use our frameworks like organization network analysis, design thinking, employee experience. Kognoz talent solutions, where we blend our consulting understanding with technology firms and bring together or deliver employees in the employee experience, where we have partnerships like Sum Total with us. And finally, Kognoz Learning Academy, where we believe in building skills and transferring the skills to the talent of the client organizations. So the webinars that we conduct like this are part of our Kognoz Learning Academy vertical, where we are coming to the audience and sharing our knowledge. So I'll quickly get on to projecting one slide, which essentially talks about April 2020 survey that Gartner had conducted. Okay, out of the 10 important priorities for an executive who are transitioning into an executive position, one of them has emerged to be digital disruption and business transformation. If you can see on the right-hand side corner, it is also highlighted in green. So if you reflect upon your experience, say about 5-7 years back, you would not see digital disruption as being a top priority for an executive leader. And mind you, this is not a executive leader for a particular function. Okay, it's a general management executive leader. And the point that comes out from this research is digital disruption or digital or digitization is becoming a backbone of the organization nowadays, and especially when considering that this survey was conducted when in the COVID scenario, it is very relevant to see where the world is moving. And follow on with that one, what the Gartner has also defined is that one of the important characteristics required in leader is called digital dexterity. That is one of the areas where or the skill sets from where the leaders can really drive the business and change towards the digital transformation. So there are 3 things that are considered for digital dexterity. Those are alignment of business, which is very contextual to the organization. Then you have employee experience. That's how people will experience the digital transformation. And finally, the metrics and operation to go back to the return on investment and matrices around the investment that people have made on going digital. So while this is there, some of you would be very familiar with this equation on the left-hand side, which is DVFR. Now, it simply says that D stands for dissatisfaction, V stands for vision, F stands for the first practical step towards change. So this equation by Beckhardt simply says that if the product of D, V, and F is greater than the resistance to change, then obviously the change will happen. So ultimately, if you look at it from this equation perspective, we need people in the organization who can overcome the resistance to change. Right. So it can be your leaders, it can be your you can be your peers or colleagues. For a change to happen, DVFR, the product of that, cannot be more than resistance. So resistance has to be overcome, and throughout the years, like what we have seen, the leaders who have been successful are also the leaders who have taken the organizations through this resistance. There will always be resistance to change. So what we require is to reflect upon what GD and Sean have talked about from an attributes perspective. Those are the things that will really help in helping the organization overcome the change. Now, when these 2 things are there, I want to go for an audience poll over here. And if you can just go back to the chat, what you will find there is, can everybody go to the chat window, including the panelist? I will paste a link over there. Okay, I need help, I guess. How do you paste a link? Yeah, yeah, I got it. So I'm going to paste a link over here. If you can just click on the link, you will find you'll find a question. It's the same question as what you see on the screen. What are your preferred ways of identifying inspiring leaders? Okay, I can see the results coming in. Surveys, mentors, CXOs identify for you. People can type multiple responses as well. Okay, confidence, I can see more results. Participative approach, team feedback, issue solving person, okay, problem solving. Okay, surveys is coming out to be a bigger one now. Motivational person, interesting. Assessment centers, interesting again. Lead by example. Any more responses? I can see 23 of the responses are here. 24. Okay, lead by example. That's interesting. Motivational, surveys, empathetic. Okay, so I think this gives a good flavor. You know, I come back to the point over here. So what we're essentially seeing from the quick poll is that essentially we're looking at people who are going to lead by example. They are motivational in nature, and the typical methods that we are seeing are surveys, assessment center, problem solving, constructive, yeah, participative approach, example oriented. Okay, so I want to bring a different perspective to identification of the leaders, and that perspective is from a social validation perspective. Okay? And that is where I will go back to my original slides where I was talking about the identification process. Okay, so what is social validation all about? Okay, so now we are all very familiar with scientific and traditional ways of identifying or inspiring leaders. So if you look at, say, a typical assessment center, we'll have multiple instruments to assess the person on. Sometimes it can be a case study, it can be a survey, it can be your role plays and caselets as well, and followed by an interview. A lot of organizations use tried and tested scientific tools like Caliper to validate those responses. While these are there, I want to bring a perspective of outside in, which means that also what matters is the people who are the peers and the lead peers, and what is their feedback on this employee. So it is a simple survey where in the social validation we ask for statements like, who do you think are the inspiring leaders in your organization? So who do you approach for solving any work-related problems in the organization? So it's a simple survey where people are free to identify or nominate up to 5 employees, and the algorithm at the back end really identifies and calculates what we call as an inspirational leadership quotient. So the algorithm and the application of organization network analysis is based on big data analysis, and there are some principles around the relationships which are there. So when you combine these kind of outside-in perspective with self-reporting mechanisms like that of a psychometric tool, that becomes a really powerful way of identifying inspiring leaders. Because ultimately what we want from these kind of talent pool is, are they in a good position to drive change, especially in times like this where these are unprecedented ones. We don't have any experience of managing such disruptions in business, and that too for such a prolonged time. Who will have that resilience? Who are those individuals who can impact maximum number of people in my organization? And what organization network analysis as a principle says is that those kind of leaders need not be essentially at the top. Okay. Very quickly, I will go to some of the principles which are there. Okay, I think I covered this one. There are a couple of principles that are there for organization network analysis, but the most important one which I want to spend time is on the pattern of relationship. Okay, so this pattern of relationship here essentially means that it is not important that, say, you are a leader in my organization, and I treat you as an inspirational leader. But my view alone is not of so much importance. But if the same view is being held by, say, 10 different odd employees who can be from any part of the organization, that becomes a more powerful validation of this. Now, again, from the algorithm perspective, it looks at the people who have now nominated the individual as inspiring leader. What is the strength of relationship between them? What is the frequency of interaction from their side? And what's the nature of relationship? So all these things put together help us identify something called inspirational leadership. And that inspirational leadership are typically what the research also says are the people who can drive change in the organization. Okay, something very quick from an organization network perspective. There are multiple use cases of organization network analysis. First and foremost is change management, where you identify the inspiring leadership from a change management perspective. Those are the people who the organization can leverage to nudge their area of influence to adopt a particular change. Then there is digital adoption, especially in these times where digital becomes the backbone or the ways of working. Those are again the people who can drive the employees towards adoption of digital platform. Encourage teamwork. People who are nowadays, we are part of the team but are operating from different locations and different time zones as well. How can we increase collaboration? What is the glue in the teamwork that really moves them towards performance? High potential. So that's an important application of ONA as well, because there are case studies from our global partners where the use of ONA has been done to validate whether the high potential identified through assessment centers or surveys or psychometric instruments are really the high potentials which even the employees are being perceiving like that. And last and not the least, organization culture. So inspiring leaders are the ones who can impact the most from a culture building perspective. So they are really high performers. The culture is going to be communicated in a manner, and those communication, if it is coming from organization inspiring leaders, so that will make the maximum impact. So again, I think I will go back to one of the slides over here, which says that inspiring leaders can come from anywhere. It need not be from the top. They can be at the middle management, junior management. They need not lead a team as well. So these are the people who make the maximum impact when it comes to changing the culture and driving digital adoption and change management in the organization. So I think that's about it from my side. I hope I have not exceeded the time, and I'll hand over to Rahul again.
Thank you, Srini. Thank you for that wonderful perspective. Now that we've been through the three panelists that we had, maybe we can take a couple of these questions. I can see that there are some 4 or 5 questions which are populated. And I think the first two which I had noted had got populated while GD was speaking, right? So maybe we'll ask GD for help here on the first two questions. GD, can you see the Q&A on your screen?
Yes, I can, Rahul. So the first question is the nature of Titan's industry being in luxury or more discretionary spend, uh, uh, the nature of the business, and the estimated high impact of the recent crisis. How are we managing the challenges to people in business transformation? So I think the way we've approached this is we've said that, safety first is our motto, both for employees and for customers, and no exceptions to that. And then as we've looked at navigating the situation, the one principle we've held very dear to ourselves is that we will stay true to our culture, and which is rooted in one of our culture statements is unconditional positive regard for people. And that is, the way we connect with people and stakeholders, listening, connecting frequently, listening actively and with empathy, sharing as much information that we can. On the decision-making front, another aspect of a culture has always been collective decision-making and collaboration. I think, and that partly kind of, answers a bit of the second question on vulnerability. Since our decision-making is collective, I think it helps in bringing in multiple perspectives and creating buy-in on decisions. What we've also done is many of these decisions, we've engaged employees in cross-functional teams to actually build those decisions and drive the change. And when it's seen coming from employee groups, I think the power of that is immense, and that's helping us tremendously. On the business front, we are staying connected with customers, suppliers, partners, the board very frequently. We are doing several experiments to learn, and it's quick learning, agile learning, and transfer of that learning. And as an example, let's say if you open one store in one location, what we've learned from that quickly gets transferred to other locations, other stores that we start opening. And that iterative process is something which is helping us tremendously in these times. Also, we've been very clear about the decision-making frameworks or principles we will use, which are all rooted in staying true to our culture. So that really is my kind of response to the first question. On the second question, I'll just add in saying vulnerability without being decisive is something which is difficult and may seem the leader come across as weak. But when you combine, if you reflect on all the capabilities that Sean brought up or I spoke of, it's really the balance in those capabilities. And the vulnerability is more around being transparent and not trying to be the hero to say, I know everything and I know all the answers and I will decide, but to be transparent with people, share as much as you can, seek as much as you can, and balance that with being decisive.
I would certainly agree there. I think one thing I've seen that's been quite effective around keeping morale not necessarily high, but as high as it can be in certain situations is an element of transparency, of being open and honest with your team about the situation and the challenges that it faces, and the way in which we are aiming to address those challenges and what our priorities as an organization are. So one way in which we handled this was to say, look, we are directly linked to the hiring industry. We are going to have some challenges through this time. Our number one priority is to keep our team and have all of our staff walk back to work when all of this is over. That is what we are focused on, is keeping all of you engaged with this company with a livelihood. And I think that it didn't give them high morale, but they at least knew that our main priority was their security rather than just the bottom line. So I think in terms of providing some surety and some certainty, a little bit of transparency about the situation and the strategy to deal with it can go a long way. I think Rahul's there. We did have one question which I accidentally answered, which was from Navin, which was, how do we develop people to deal with paradoxes and biases? I could perhaps shed a little bit of light on that depending on what you mean by biases, but we tend to see a lot of leaders in India are low on a certain personality trait called openness. And openness is a comfort for receiving feedback and also for accepting other people's ideas. And when you couple that with a couple of other personality traits such as high skepticism of others and a low flexibility, you can see people with significant biases, particularly when it comes to other people's opinions and feedback. So what do we do about that? The first step there is self-awareness for that leader to know that this is my innate position. This is my natural reaction when someone brings a problem to me or an idea to me. And then, you know, companies like Kognoz can give them a strategy of, okay, well, when something comes into me, I know what my initial reaction is. My job is to pause, process that, and then implement a strategy of how am I going to evaluate the merit of this idea or this opinion objectively, away from that innate perspective. So that's probably how we see it play out. Is it often is an innate characteristic of leaders, particularly in India, particularly male, by the way, is the data. GD, did you have anything to add to that question? It was directed to you as well.
Yeah, so I think, Sean, that's true. I'll just want to just add that element of to manage biases or deal with them more effectively. The first step is really the awareness part of it. And the biggest help we can provide to leaders is help them be much greater self-aware on not just their biases, but the impact that those biases result in. And I have seen that, you know, most leaders, once they understand that, are much more open to bringing about a shift and a change. And that has, from my experience, you know, that has helped tremendously in bringing about that change at an individual and a collective leadership level as well.
Right. So I think that answers, you know, all the questions that were posed during the seminar. I can see another open fifth question. There's another question that just cropped up right now. Please guide on how to create a culture of transparency and efficiency in the current scenario.
So Sean, you want to go for it?
I mean, I thought Srini might you know, with his culture change and knowledge, might be better equipped to answer this. Srini, did you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so when I look at that question, the thought that came to my mind is that if you go back to the poll, the word Cloudclay says that one of the things was lead by example. So these kind of culture changes are transparency and efficiency. Unless the leaders walk the talk from a transparency perspective, they need to be open about how the business is going on, what is the outlook of the business that they are visualizing. So establishing that line of sight and being very true and honest. So what people call it as honest, open, and transparent kind of conversation and communication that happens. So people, especially the leaders, need to be hot about the business scenario, engage in people one-to-one and one-to-many forums as well. Give an impression that it is they are approachable and walk the talk by creating that kind of a trust. You would see that a lot of companies now, while they have gone for, say, salary cut and pay cut, it's the leaders who have also communicated and mentioned that the kind of salary cut that they are going to take up is proportionately more than what they are going to pass it on to the junior or middle employees. So when you write a communication in that manner, it also gives a sense of credibility to the leaders, saying that we are as much in them as they are. So everybody is feeling the pain, and that goes about in lending the credibility on the communication as well as the leadership. So so to sum it up, it's about walking the talk and leading by example. That's the first and foremost principle for me.
I would agree, and you know, Vandana's question there is how can leaders lead this for their teams? I think Srini's really made a good point there. I've even implemented strategies as simple as let's start with a team meeting. The team meeting is the perfect opportunity for a leader who has previously made decisions for the team and delegated what to do to actually create that culture, as GD was talking around, of collective decision making, of start with a new strategy of inclusive decision making and sharing a problem and bringing all of the ideas of the team in. Even if those ideas aren't the ones that are taken forward, you create engagement by saying, these are the challenges we face as a team, who can contribute to the solutions here. And if just one employee sees that their idea is the one that is taken forward, you suddenly have a leader who is really highly valued and has an engaged team. So I think it can even start as simply as that, as encouraging our leaders to change the structure of their team meetings in order to give their direct reports an opportunity to have more say and more influence in what the challenges are.
Thanks, Sean and G and Srini for your inputs. I think we're doing pretty well on time. Just about, we finished the answer all the questions. If there are any closing thoughts from any of us, and then we can.
No, I think I hope everyone's found this valuable. I mean, the main thing we'd love you to do, Rahul, did you want to mention that we've sent through a form for people? Is that correct?
Yes. So already a form has been sent around 10 minutes ago. That's a feedback form. So you can send us your feedback on this thing and the way forward. What are some other topics that you would like to see other webinars on?
Yeah, and the other thing is if you would like to speak or connect with one of the three of us as panelists after this session and have a conversation with us, please check the box, and we'll more than happily connect with you. And Rahul and Cohen, as a partnership here, will be in touch with further topics that and would love to hear what you'd like to hear from us about. So please feel free to share your ideas and thoughts in that form.
All right, thank you. Thank you to everybody who's attending. Thank you to our panelists, and talk to you the next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.